Saturday, September 15th, 1928, was a dark day for Puerto Rico. 275 people killed, thousands homeless. Latest reports from the U.S. Weather Bureau indicate that the killer storm will not reach the Florida mainland.
You fixing to leave the island, Mr. Turner?
No, reckon not. This place stood the cane a couple of years ago. The radio says the storm won't hit Florida. Tell your dad you're welcome to come up here if the storm gets rough enough.
Thanks, Mr. Turner.
Hey, Mr. Burnett.
Hey? Hey there, Jerry.
You coming with me? The lake's raised another foot since first light.
Nope. You going ahead. I sat the storm out right here 2 years ago. I ain't worried none.
You don't understand these hurricanes like me. I was in Miami in '26 and saw big buildings blown down and ocean steamers in the streets. And you know what that storm did right across the lake in Moorhaven there. 200 people got drowned.
I'll mind the cow. See you when you get back.
Hey, Jerry. Looks like you're fixing to leave. Glad somebody's got some sense on this island.
Ross, just take a look at that flag. The day before yesterday, I put a peg under it, and it's still pointing to it. That's 32 hours the wind's been steady out of the northeast. No wonder the lake's rising.
Well, yesterday's Palm Beach Post said we was going to have northeast winds today. But, you know, they didn't say a thing about the storm coming this way.
Well, I'm not afraid of wind. I'm not afraid of water. But too much of both at once. It's time to leave.
Well, I'll see you, Jerry.
We got all kinds of conflicting weather reports that afternoon in Belgrade. People were a little apprehensive, but not really scared. I had a busy afternoon pumping gas, charging batteries, and changing tires. My friend Arthur Wells was my last customer. As he drove away, I noticed the leaves of the bamboo clump near the bridge whipping past my face like a swarm of angry hornets. That was some wind.
That's the complete weather report. There's no danger that the storm at sea will strike Florida.
By the time we reached the packing shed, we couldn't buck those winds anymore, so we stayed there. The building seemed to be holding up. Then we heard the sounds. As the building fell apart, I was dragged underwater and nearly drowned. Then I got loose and come up for air. I found somebody down there, all tangled up in a tractor. It turned out to be my girl Elizabeth. Later, we were wedged against the A-frame of one of Mr. Holloway's floating dredges in the canal. Of the 22 people in the packing house, only 12 of us survived.
The Sunday night, just before the storm hit, we took refuge in the Thirst House and the Seaman Farm. There was about 63 people in all. As the water rose, the men cut holes in the ceiling. With my father help, I scrambled through the hole, and after the house disappeared in the water, I wound up on some wreckage and floated back in the glades. And the following afternoon, my father found me miles away from the house. But my mother, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers, my uncle and aunt, and their 2 children were lost in the storm.
The lull reached Belgrade about 8:30 p.m. Not until then did we realize the roof had blown off my service station. We were looking for a lost child by the canal about a block away, when suddenly the backlash hit us. A wall of water came at us. We rode out the storm aboard a dynamite driller's barge in the canal. The water crested in Belgrade about 10:20 p.m.
When the house left its foundations, our family and some neighbors took refuge on the top of an Indian mound. I held the baby on my shoulder with one hand and grabbed on some weeds with the other to keep from being swept away. we lost everything we had in the world but the children.
Dawn on Black Monday revealed a scene of utter desolation. In the whole town of Belle Glade, only 6 buildings remained on their original foundations. Between the stricken communities on the lake and West Palm Beach lay 40 miles of trackless wilderness, most of it underwater, clogged with mountains of muck and debris. Telephone wires were down. There was no food, no drinking water. Roads were impassable. Volunteers from the American Legion from all over the state were the first to bring in food, water, and medical supplies. They cleared away debris, rescued the living, and helped search for the dead. More than 2,000 people perished in the Okeechobee hurricane, third worst disaster in American history. The exact number of casualties can never be ascertained. Many were migrant farm laborers for whom no vital records existed. Coffins could not be brought into the area fast enough. Stacks of unclaimed bodies were soaked with fuel oil and cremated for reasons of public health. Some voices of doom claimed that human beings had no business living south of the lake and proposed that the entire area be evacuated, a wall built, and the military posted to prevent anyone from coming back. Then other voices were heard.
President-elect Herbert Hoover made a personal tour of the devastated communities of the Okeechobee area today. In a statement to newsmen, he pledged his support of federal legislation to prevent a recurrence of such disasters.
Congressman, every man on the committee is sympathetic to the Okeechobee project, but we'll have to go in through the back door, so to speak.
I see.
Our bill will provide for the improvement of navigation on the Caloosahatchee River, Taylor Creek, and the St. Lucie Canal.
And to do this, a dependable levee will have to be constructed on the south rim of the lake.
Our thinking exactly, Congressman.
In November 1930, the Army Corps of Engineers started work on a new improved levee, later known as the Herbert Hoover Dike. By 1937, the federal government had expended $16 million on the project. Numerous sub-drainage districts were formed by landowners, joining local interest with the major project. With the memories of the great floods uppermost in people's minds, the major thrust of these early projects was drainage. But drainage was by no means the complete answer, as events showed. Successive dry spells from 1931 to 1945 lowered water levels dangerously. The new enemy was not water, it was fire. Not only did the tender dry vegetation burn, the organic muckland soil itself was consumed.
The United States Public Health Service closed down a number of wells in Dade County today due to excess salinity. In a related development, the Miami City Council issued a proclamation requesting residents to conserve water.
With the increased demand for greater food production in World War II, vast areas of raw land in South Florida were opened up to large-scale agriculture, thereby imposing further strains on Florida's diminishing water resources. Then the pendulum of nature made another swing. In 1947, after a wet summer, hurricanes again struck Florida. This time, the coastal communities of the southeast and the area's farmlands suffered most.
What is the estimated damage to agricultural interests due to these floods?
More than $44 million, Senator.
That high? Well.
Yes, sir. That's damage to agriculture only.
When you include damage to state and county road systems and drainage facilities, the total comes to $55 million, probably more.
That's exclusive of hurricane damage.
And that doesn't include federal emergency funds. That's another $400,000.
The Kissimmee River from the north. It just can't handle all the water.
The Florida Commission Company in Palm Beach. No vegetables this winter.
Fort Lauderdale's downtown area, the Venice of America.
VA homes built on low ground, wiped out.
Gentlemen, I believe we've seen enough. Lights, please. Gentlemen, we appreciate your bringing these graphic exhibits to Washington. Your point is well taken. A single master plan prepared by the Army Corps of Engineers involving federal, state, and local participation is necessary. I know that I speak for the entire committee when I tell you that we will recommend to Congress...
The following year, a master plan was completed and authorized by Congress, heralding a new approach to water control in central and southern Florida. Water conservation and management were the key to the new plan. In 1949, the Florida legislature formed a single state agency to manage the proposed system of flood control works after their completion by the Army Corps of Engineers. This agency, the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control District, was made responsible for water management in 18 Florida counties, covering about 15,600 square miles, an area the size of New Jersey. Estimated cost of the entire system when completed, $530 million. First phase of the master plan called for flood protection of the agricultural areas south of the lake and of the urban communities along the lower East Coast. Excess water was to be stored in the lake and also in 3 vast water conservation areas encompassing a large part of the Everglades. Control of the easterly flow of fresh water from the Everglades to tidewater was essential. The plan also provided for an adequate supply of water for Everglades National Park, a federal wilderness preserve. Another phase of the plan involved the regulation of water flow patterns in the Kissimmee River Basin, including the chain of lakes to the north. The plan included many collateral aims: cross-state navigation, public recreation, freshwater fishing, water conservation, protection of wildlife, control of saltwater encroachment, over-drainage, and more. A colossal building program was undertaken, the largest construction project since the Panama Canal. It consisted of an integrated system of 2,000 miles of canals and levees, 90 water control structures, and 14 pumping stations, together with related power plants, reservoirs, dams, control gates, and salt water barriers. A system of water management and control that is unique in world history. 3 giant water conservation areas were developed, totaling 1,345 square miles, to impound excess water for future use, gathered from agricultural areas and from portions of the southeast coast. The results of all these works, even though only partially completed, have been far-reaching. 500,000 acres of rich muckland were opened up for large-scale cultivation. Thousands of sportsmen were provided with quality recreational facilities for fishing, hunting, and boating. Large new communities were built for tens of thousands of new Floridians in former wilderness areas, where living would have been impossible just a few years before. South Florida has become a major metropolitan area capable of supporting 3 million people. Florida's population explosion serves to underline a simple basic fact. There is only so much water available. Our natural resources are limited. Man has had to interfere with nature's cycle of flood and drought to make Central and South Florida habitable. He must continue to change and control the area's topography as long as he lives here. Once he starts, there is no turning back. Allocating the limited water resources of the district at times becomes a highly charged emotional issue.
According to a conservation spokesman, some 5,000 deer are stranded in flooded conservation areas in the Everglades. The flooding is due to the prolonged heavy rainfall that has made the summer of 1966 the wettest since 1947. In assessing responsibility, the extensive flood control works of the Army Corps of Engineers and the FCD were cited as factors in upsetting the balance of nature and causing the decimation of the herds.
G.E. Dale, executive director of the FCD, answered these charges.
Mr. Dale, do you have any comment on yesterday's story blaming the Corps of Engineers and the FCD for the drowning of the deer?
Well, I don't know whether any of you were here back in 1947. The same thing happened then, before the Corps of Engineers and the FCD ever got into the act. One thing our critic didn't mention, we've had more rain this summer than we did in 1947, without major flooding. Don't get me wrong, we're concerned about the deer, but the strongest animals in the herd will survive, just as they have survived in past cycles of flood and drought. The FCD can't manage South Florida's water resources for the benefit of a single species. This doesn't happen in nature, nor can it happen in any ecological system, managed or not. Often we're guilty of tunnel vision. We lose sight of the whole picture. Flood damages amounting to more than $20 million has been prevented so far this year by flood control works. At least one critic has been doing his worrying in a dry house.
The green areas would have been flooded in 1966 without the flood control works completed at that time. By the end of 1970, the FCD system of flood control and water storage works had prevented almost $200 million in flood damages during major storms. The value of increased land use resulting from the project was estimated to be worth twice as much as the total in flood damage prevention. But allocation of available water resources is only part of the story. Several experimental projects are underway to increase the water resources of the district. During the 1970-71 drought, 16 cloud seeding missions were conducted in 14 days in cooperation with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The program had two major aims. First, to produce rainfall. Second, to evaluate this type of program for future use. On 11 of 14 days of seeding, there was substantial cloud growth. On 10 days, seeded clouds merged and produced substantial rainfall in the Everglades. On 2 days, rainfall also occurred in Miami. Another method of water conservation is pumping surface water into deep wells in the limestone substratum or aquifer. The limestone holds excess water like a giant sponge until it is needed in the dry season. Because of its mineral content, recharged water can be used only for limited purposes. Water quality is one of Florida's greatest environmental problems. Recent scientific advances in analysis of water samples enables FCD scientists, with the technical assistance of the U.S. Geological Survey, to determine the elements in water samples within a few minutes. Data is rapidly supplied, indicating mineral trace elements, chemical content, bacterial count, information that is useful in water quality control. As it enters its third decade, the FCD has a prime concern with water quality, as well as the quantity of water resources. A new FCD mobile lab has been put in operation, capable of testing dissolved oxygen level, temperature, chlorides, and other data. In time, the engineering department will compile a bank of water quality data in every canal in the district. The new equipment will enable the district to investigate water pollution complaints firsthand. In heavily populated areas, dumping of treated sewage effluent into canals creates serious problems during the dry season. This situation results in growth of lush aquatic vegetation on the surface of the canal and large-scale seepage into the groundwater table. Funding improved sewage treatment plants or developing solid waste disposal methods are among the most urgent problems facing South Florida today. In conjunction with other public agencies, the FCD has placed a moratorium on the discharge of treated wastewater effluent into some waterways. Aquatic weed control of such exotics as the water hyacinth has been an area of continuing research for many years by the FCD in cooperation with the Agricultural Research Service. Mechanical control is ineffective and inefficient. Herbicides are effective, but their continued use affects water quality. Intensive research is going on to develop the best chemical agents and to reduce undesirable side effects to an acceptable minimum. Various biological control methods are also under study, but they are still in an experimental stage. The FCD's Environmental Services Division is conducting urgently needed research on control of other exotics, plants, animals, and fish, which have no natural enemies in the district.
Take an exotic, like the piranha fish, for example. Do you have any idea what would happen if a large colony of piranha were to get loose in the waters of South Florida? Believe me, we'd be in trouble. And we have no reliable data to serve as a basis for our actions. That's what worries us so about exotics. Biologists at the FCD and other agencies are trying to fill in the gaps in our limited knowledge of the ecosystem in order that we might predict the consequences of management actions. Take DDT, for example. At the lower end of the food chain, where the gene pool is large and the rate of reproduction very rapid, hardy strains develop within 100 generations which are completely resistant to DDT and other strong pesticides. Large fish, birds, mammals which reproduce more slowly simply cannot adapt fast enough to DDT and they die. The slower reproducing species between these small creatures and man himself are wiped out. And this is one of the reasons we've had to restrict the use of some pesticides.
In other biological studies, the FCD is recreating marsh areas along the Kissimmee River by raising the water level of the impoundments along the river. The increased depth will enhance fish and wildlife values in the marsh, starting at the lower end of the food chain. At every stage in the water level, we have records of the dominant plant and animal life from the simpler forms on up the food chain. By providing more spawning and nursery areas for smaller aquatic life, we obtain a higher growth rate for forage fish, thus providing additional food for game fish and wading birds. Eventually, an additional 10,000 acres will be restored to marshland in the Kissimmee Basin.
As though they were examining a vast living organism, scientists probe the changing biological rhythms of the great marsh at every water level, from flood to drought. How does periodic burning affect marsh vegetation? Carefully controlled tests provide some answers, and each answer brings up more questions. Research by FCD biologists is also preserving wilderness and water values in the St. Johns River Basin. These studies will enhance a marsh area that was ditched and drained indiscriminately before the FCD was established. Biologists placed nets across the river to obtain samplings of fish and marine life. One of the most productive annual runs of shad in North America occurs in the St. Johns. Plans are being developed to construct fish ladders or lifts to accommodate the annual run of shad. The sample fish are examined to determine their major food supply. FCD biologists are studying the run in a sampling program in the hope of reestablishing the conditions which existed prior to the ditching and draining of the flood plain. The red mangrove habitat provides a vital link in the food chain of snook, snapper, and countless marine organisms. Biologists have developed an ingenious method of reestablishing the red mangrove by dropping seedlings, weighted with small steel rods from the air. Survival rate, 80%. Far better odds than nature's own. FCD water management schedules are subject to change. Biologists make checks of known rookeries and do everything in their power to ensure the safety of the birds and their young.
It's my contention that the ecology of the Everglades is tough and not as delicately balanced as some observers claim. Everglades vegetation snaps back rapidly after a drought. Fish populations respond more slowly, but eventually, following a severe drought, there is a tremendous spawn and a high survival rate for young fish. Bass, for example, because they encounter a less competitive situation than normal. Small forage fish and other food items are plentiful, so you might say that after a drought or a flood, nature adjusts.
Looking back, the heavy loss of life in the 1926 and 1928 disasters was due largely to poor communications. The telemetry now under construction is the largest and most sophisticated computerized water management system in America. Information on rainfall, evaporation, ground and surface water levels, stream flows, water quality, and other hydrometeorological information will provide a complete analysis of water needs from more than 160 points in the district, providing the basis for operational decisions. Spillway gates, miles away from the control center, can be opened and closed by microwave signals.
What is the estimated damage to agricultural interests due to these floods?
More than $44 million, Senator.
That high?
The recommended design is a digital acquisition and control system linked via radio communications capable of being exercised reliably under the most severe environmental conditions.
We've come a long way since the disasters of 1926, 1928, and 1947. Disasters that took many lives and caused much destruction. There will be more hurricanes, of course, more floods, and more drought. But now we're better able to cope with disaster. We're building the facilities for managing our water resources. We have a blueprint outlining a district water resource plan through the year 2020. It's a good plan. We have assembled a staff of engineers, chemists, biologists, and operational specialists capable of solving the problems of water management. We're called upon almost daily to figure out answers to complex environmental problems not even visualized when our agency was established in 1949. With the support of the people of Florida, we can help create an environment where both man and nature can exist in harmony.